Well, great to see everyone here today. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we live on. We're here on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Great to see all the names. Feel free to turn your cameras on if you fancy it, but sometimes I like to hide too. But welcome, wonderful members. Today we're going to be talking a bit about the COVID-19 situation and what we can do in informing the government. And we'll briefly speak to the Tranche 3 funding as well that came out last week, which was quite an interesting find for us all, and we're keen to hear your feedback on that. So we've got 45 minutes for today. Welcome everyone. What I'm going to do is Tamara and I at Domestic Violence New South Wales will be taking turns. Hello Monique, quick hi, shout out. So what we'll be doing is asking a set of questions. We've got 4, and we're probably going to try and time 9 minutes for each one, just so we can gather as much information as possible. Tamara will also run through some of the survey findings, so thank you to all of you who completed the survey. What's going to be really key for us is making sure government has your voices at the centre of the feedback we'll be providing on what we need to be doing around COVID-19, what continually needs to be thought about, and just some of the issues that we'll discuss with you today. So I will start, really keen for your thoughts on this as well. And I guess I'll carefully try and facilitate and just see if you pop your hand up, or in the box, maybe Pip can flag to me as well if someone's keen to speak. So question 1 from us is, did you receive the Tranche 3 funding update from us? And what did you think? And will you be applying? Would anyone like to go first? So this is so last week, Domestic Violence New South Wales updated everyone that the Women New South Wales and Haybury, lovely to see you there too. So Tranche 3 funding was announced, and we know that a minimum of $25,000 can be applied for via a grant. And interestingly, Women New South Wales have announced that this funding will be for infrastructure. We're really keen to hear your thoughts. We had a sector chat session with you probably October last year. We took everybody's feedback from that session and fed it into government. Interestingly, nothing was said about infrastructure, so it was an interesting decision that was made. We'd be really keen to hear if you're going to apply for that funding and what your thoughts were around that announcement.
I can start if no one else wants to. I'm Taryn from Warina Harbour. We are looking to apply. I guess some of the things, it feels like a very big job, so we're kind of waiting for today. I've got a little team of Warina folk in the background as well, so we're trying to wrap our head around what we need for the grant, and I guess very concerned maybe about the tight time frame, particularly if it means working with architects and trades to try and get stuff back from them. It's just a difficult time. We're also, I guess, looking for some guidance on the scale of what they're talking about, because, when you're talking about infrastructure, what's the top limit? Like, obviously 25 grand doesn't get you much, but the top limit is quite big. And then probably on top of that, I'm also really conscious that Land and Housing Corp are also doing some consultation later in the month, 3 days before this deadline, around refuge architecture. So we're really trying to work out what to focus on, because obviously, infrastructure obviously is a important part of what we need. But I guess for me, I'm concerned that if we having more beds and houses is fantastic, but we're going to lose, I guess, that COVID funding that was supporting an increase in staffing. So having a big infrastructure funding that puts more people in safe houses is fantastic, but we're not necessarily going to have the staff and caseworkers to support how, I guess, the needs of clients once they do enter transitional properties. Does that make some sense?
That makes so much sense, and we kind of wanted to hear a lot of that, and we really valued the feedback that we had. I guess the concern certainly from us is the project management that's going to be needed if you're...
It scares the crap out of me. Like, I'm not a builder, obviously. But even things like, do we need to progress it through a DA with council? Like, how do we are we going out shopping for land? Like, it's just, and, you know, I'm not alone I'm sure in Coffs Harbour having a property stock prices, be it, you know, purchasing or rental. And our property prices, obviously, like other parts of the state, are climbing. So it's really hard just off the reading on where to even start with some of that stuff. But the time frame is probably, today is my major concern, because we have a lot of ideas, but where is our best bet? Like, what is it that we should be, what idea should we be backing to get us the best potential without kind of burning us all out and being able to deliver on something?
Definitely, and that feedback's so important, because we'll be able to feed that back as well, like as if we don't need more burnout than we've already had and or we're already exposed to. Time frame issue we can feed back on. I know that some of the ideas were around maybe kind of ensuring that you had disability access, that you could maybe create like a playroom in a refuge or like playroom facility. So there's some of those things that I think would be quite helpful. But what would be good from this is if everyone shared their thoughts and ideas with each other as well, so we can maybe create that following today's meeting to hear what people's ideas were around the infrastructure. Did everyone get the Tranche 3 update from us? Great stuff. So yeah, please again, open to the floor around further things you'd like us to look into. We've got about 3 minutes for this still, 3-4 minutes.
I'm Sarah, I'm up from Northern New South Wales with Momentum. We have a very outdated, not fit for purpose refuge with no disability access in Lismore. So this grant really appeals for us. Again, I voiced some of the concerns earlier. We're just about to head into a 2-week school holiday time frame, which makes it extremely hard for us to give that time frame to external people to go do quoting and project time frames for us and risk management. Again, our biggest thing is we're going, how small, how large do we aim for? It's really confusing because there's some small things listed on there, but then of course there's very big things like demolishing of buildings and land, and you know, so it really puts us in a space of, do we try just for something small and simple to try to get disability access for Lismore Refuge, or do we try for something really large and try for a fit for purpose on the same site? But we're just unsure what's the best idea to go for, but we don't want to miss out if we go too large. So it'd be good to get some sort of indicator in that sense.
Thank you, Sarah, that's really helpful.
Hi, it's Petra from Salvos. I've got 2 thoughts on this with 2 hats. You've got your service hat and then you've got the sector hat, and the Salvation Army obviously welcomes the $8 million. It's not a lot when you think about 80, 90, 100 organisations across the state. I have reached out, just if anyone was wondering if they've got multiple sites, that you can do multiple applications. So I got confirmation that an organisation can apply for separate grants for, say, if you have a service in one area, in a regional or an urban location, and there is no cap. So you could literally ask for $8 million if you wanted to. But obviously there's that $25,000 minimum cap. I appreciate that there are smaller organisations that don't have the capital to actually go out and get structural engineers. So there's a divide, I think, within the haves and the have-nots in regards to resources to actually maximise the grant. But some of the ideas that we're going to look at is where we have space is to hopefully develop, if successful, fit-for-purpose accommodation to make value-based accommodation with independent living areas, and obviously the virtual conferencing, and as Delia said, the disability access and inclusion and sensory play areas. So all that, there's a really good comprehensive number of bullet points that kind of really speak into what I think we fed back to you guys in the last one, because all of those points kind of touches on things we were saying, this is what we need. But in saying that, I feel like maybe where we can give them information to say there needs to be additional funding for people to be able to apply for bigger capital builds and land acquisition, the smaller organisations, to give them the same, you know, playing field in regards to hiring architects to get those plans, because those ideas are everywhere, but some people have the resources and some people don't, or organisations.
Yeah, I wonder if they made this decision based on once it's stopped, it's done. And then there won't be the further requests to continue the case management and all the things we fed back on initially, which we've definitely fed back, by the way.
I heard that there were 6 tranches as well. I heard that the other day. I hadn't heard that before. So that there's another 3 tranches, another 3 grant rounds coming. So there's 6 in total, and that's why it's kind of very reactive responses for us. It's hard to strategically plan when you don't know what the details of the grants are or how much they are. So even if you had a long-term strategic plan, this grant has thrown out some of those strategies already, because you're like, oh gosh, now we have $8 million to apply for. So it does keep us a little bit dancing around without being able to do some long-term planning. Other than just
something I know Renata's been really key in terms of advocacy for DVNSW is ensuring we have greater transparency around the budget and where it goes, and that'll be something we'll be continuing to call out as well. Thanks, Petra. Monique?
Thanks, Celia. Hi, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm a bit scratchy. We were just wondering, in terms of the Tranche 3 funding, do you think it's something that organisations such as DV Services can apply for to make their facilities more animal friendly as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that would be part of the aim as well, around amending the refuges or the, facilities to be pet friendly. That would definitely be something they're committed to.
Oh, amazing. So we just weren't sure, given the pause funding went out relatively recently, whether there's any kind of indication that those kinds of applications might be excluded, but that's good to know.
I will check it definitely, but I'm sure it's included, but I'll make sure we get back to you.
Thanks, Delia.
Okay, so I've slightly blown an extra minute, so I'm going to hand over to Tam, but can keep the chat box moving and we'll take all this information through. Thank you so much. This was a really key question for us because we kind of were a bit surprised by the funding, really, based on the feedback we gave. But yeah, keep sending us your thoughts. Thanks, Tam.
Thanks, Julia. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Tamara Palace. I'm the Strategy and Programs Manager at DV New South Wales. The rest of the sector chat we were going to devote to COVID and the impacts of COVID on the sector, which I think we have referred to previously, but because COVID's a unfolding situation that changes all the time, we did want to check in with you because part of our role in terms of giving information to the Department of Communities and Justice, or DCJ, is letting them know what the impact of COVID is on the sector and what they can do to help the sector be able to deal with COVID sustainably. So about 12 services filled out the survey we sent out. And what I was going to do is briefly just run through some of the responses we got to the survey questions and see whether there's anything any of you who are online now would like to add, or whether you'd like to expand on any points. So the first question was, what have been the main impacts of COVID on your service? The responses we got were 5 services said increase in demand, so that was a big theme. 5 services said staff stress and greater pressures on staff well-being. We also got responses about increase in complexity of client issues, increased use of computer-based service provision, in some cases requiring a pivot of the service's entire business model to online service provision, and obviously a disruption of face-to-face work. Increased compliance requirements related to cleaning, tracking and policy changes, and heightened stress for managers trying to understand and implement these requirements. For services offering refuge, they said an inability to accommodate as many clients because of social distancing rules. Services reported that clients were more anxious and there was more anxiety and depression in the community in general. They said that risk identification and management was more difficult in an online service provision environment, and children particularly were out of sight because they didn't tend to appear with their parents so much. There were court delays due to courts providing services only by phone, and there was fundraising and event cancellation resulting in decreased revenue for services. So just wanted to throw it open to everyone. First of all, is there anything you'd like to add to those impacts?
I think I'd like, sorry, I think I'd like to quickly add there was it was discussed just before around lots of staff perhaps feeling vulnerable and not coming into work. That was one of our biggest pressures, especially in some of the refuges where we had staff members that had different vulnerabilities with their personal health or caring for others. I think that's a pretty obvious one we all struggled with, but even when we had some increased funding from DCJ for COVID, we couldn't find any staff to help us do the casual work. So it's really hard. It's not like other jobs. It's not retail. You can't just go and get someone and train them quickly. It's domestic violence. And it was extremely hard for us to try and cover or replace workers, even if we had the funding to do so.
Thanks so much, Sarah. They're really good points. And was the difficulty in getting new staff related to people not wanting to risk their health, or just due to lack of trained workers?
Mainly due to lack of trained workers. But we did see, we run a lot of different services, and we've seen it across the whole board in different programs and sectors as well, with a lot of people not engaging in the workforce during that time.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Sarah. Anyone else?
Yeah, Jodie here.
Jodie.
Hi there. Thanks, Tamara, and thanks for holding this consult. I just want to speak on behalf of a lot of the regional centres, in that one of the side effects of COVID is tourism on steroids, which is fantastic for regional tourism, regional communities. But oh my God, there is less than zero housing, and it has flow-on effects in everything. So it's causing a lot more stress, and it's a secondary impact, which will continue for as long as the borders are closed. Massive, massive tourism that we haven't seen before.
Thanks,
We
Jodie.
really echo, yeah, in Coffs Harbour, we'd really echo that. And I guess it was frustrating to see the government encouraging people to leave the city to regional areas where there are no houses already.
That's right.
And our clients were competing with people coming from the city on corporate income, so it's just annihilated our chance to move women into safe.
So it's annihilated the move into safe accommodation, but it's also pushed housing prices up dramatically by about 25%. And so that, and in turn, as also that, apart from the fact that there is no rental accommodation, the rental prices have gone up dramatically.
Yeah, and the other issue we'd add on that, which I'm sure is not unique here, is that temporary accommodation providers tend to be motels in our area.
Yep.
They've kind of changed their stance on our they're back on the tourist buck because it's getting them more.
Yep.
And some providers now refuse to take our clients that they refer to as your kind, because they know they can make a bigger turn of profit on the tourist market. That caused us a lot of upset, because they were happy to depend on our money during the lockdown. So it's really frustrating from that perspective that they have turned their back on, I guess, you know, the relationship that we've had. So it was a huge issue. I just can't stress enough how big of an issue that was. So thank you so much for bringing it up.
Yeah, thank you, Jodie and Taryn. That theme did come up in the later survey responses, and it's also come up from the people in our domestic and family violence community of practice, many of whom are from services in regional areas. So we'll definitely be giving that feedback. Thanks. Anyone else want to add to any of the issues, or perhaps expand on some of the issues that I just outlined?
Okay, I'll move on, and thanks everyone, because I just spoke to the Australian Women's Weekly about some of these issues actually, and I think that's going to be an interesting audience that we probably need to get to as well around some of those issues you've just raised. Tourism is such a big point. So our next question is what support, and I know what the answer is going to be, but please say it loud and proud, and any other things you can think of, but what support should we be asking for from DCJ to support you in managing the impacts of COVID-19? So what should we be asking DCJ for when we send them this report and we meet with the Attorney General next month?
I think, as you said, you already know, staffing. It's staffing, and building capacity, workforce capacity. Particularly in the regional remote areas, I think though we've heard everyone is having trouble recruiting staff. Skilled staff. Next one, housing.
So I might just outline for you what people said in response to that question in the survey. It was mostly related to funding and the need for more funding. So people talked about a continuation of the COVID funding. They said that they would like that funding beyond December 2021 to maintain the capacity to meet increased demand. A lot of services said that although community transmission with COVID has reduced, the increased demand on services hasn't reduced. There were specific areas where services asked for increased COVID-related funding. One was health and cleaning expenses, more staff, as you've said, was mentioned, staff training to deal with COVID-related issues, funding for IT infrastructure and to support clients to access IT services, brokerage funding, because one service maintained that the job seeker boost indirectly gave clients more access to brokerage funds, and with the cuts to job seeker, that will be reduced. Funding for TA, especially for people who are unwell and or isolating, and then funding to support managers understand their governance processes during the pandemic. And then there were a whole lot of responses that related to the need for increased funding for the sector to be sustainable generally. And that wasn't specifically related to COVID, but it was just related to the fact that the sector is generally under-resourced and the COVID funding injection hasn't been a solution to that. Some services asked for services that provided refuge, I should say, specifically asked that there be a transition to core and cluster refuges that are more able to deal with infection control than the congregate living model, and that be expedited. I guess the Tranche 3 funding could help with that. And one service commented that the measures adopted during the COVID pandemic that dealt with diversion from incarceration in prisons was the only period in the past 10 years when they had seen a drop in the number of women being incarcerated, and they wanted that changed so that it continues.
And that was me, Tamara, who said that. It's the only time in the last 10 years we've seen a drop in the remand population. And that was because the prisons were in lockdown and the courts all made a decision that women could be placed on bail rather than be incarcerated. And amazingly, they were still able to look after their children. They were still able to stay home, and there were no detrimental impacts. So we would strongly advocate for that around staying connected with children. So it's the first time in 10 years there has been a drop in the remand population. On the other side of it, they locked down the prison and there were no in-person visits for, I think it only just reopened in the last couple of weeks. So that's been 12 months, no in-person visits from family members.
That must have been very, very rough.
It's been horrendous, truly horrendous for those women.
It's great to hear about the diversion from incarceration though, so we'll incorporate that in our feedback. The next question is, what support should we be asking for from, that was the last question was what support we should be asking for from DCJ, and most of it centered around funding. The subsequent question is, besides our role in advocating to DCJ about what you need to manage the impacts of COVID-19, what else can DV New South Wales as an organisation be doing to help you to manage these impacts? Anyone want to comment on that?
I had maybe a bit of a half-baked idea early on, but it goes to the question around recruitment of staff, which was really difficult to find anybody who was, you know, I guess like we talked about before, had the experience. But one thing I did think of at one point was if there was a capacity for someone like DV New South Wales to do some induction training, not on the service, obviously we would do that, but just like basic things like this, the DV SAT. This is just like the kind of the foundational core, the foundational stuff maybe to when you're trying to build someone up from maybe just a caseworker to a DV specialist caseworker, some consolidated training sessions. So I guess all of us were kind of like, if we found staff, we were scrambling to bring them up to speed with all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, imagine if you could get all these people we've pulled on as casual and put them into a group training session that on some of those stuff that we would have all been training. I know that's probably, obviously there'd be so many different variations and, you know, intricacies on how different services deliver that. But that was one thing I did think around at the time would have been helpful to be able to plug someone into like an induction program. But I don't know.
We would love something like that. The team talk about that all the time. So it's certainly not a half-baked idea and definitely something on our radar if we can get a bit of sustainability and funding sorted out in this arena. But training and good practice guidelines and minimum standards, all those types of things are so essential and areas that are definitely going to be our focus. So we'll keep you all informed on that. Thank you, Taryn.
Just conscious that we've only got about 2 minutes left. If anyone wants to add anything to what we should be doing, now's your time.
May I?
We've actually got till 2 o'clock.
Oh, do we? Oh, okay. In that case, no. We have plenty of time. Does anyone want to add? Sorry, Fiona, you were speaking.
Oh, yes. Hello. I'd love it if we could continue to advocate for the fact that there's a lot of unmet demand. So maybe to use the campaign for adequate funding, because we have a lot of women and children who are turned away because there's not enough housing availability, but also the groups that seem to be really invisible and constantly invisible in a lot of policy is culturally and linguistically diverse women, Aboriginal women and kids, and disabled women who suffer more discrimination and vulnerabilities in the DV sector and indeed in all sectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Given that the focus that we're talking about has been COVID responses, just wondering if you could suggest any ways in which COVID responses could be better tailored to those groups.
Well, we found there was a trend for culturally and linguistically diverse women, a decrease of them reaching out services. So whether there needs to be better interpreter or multilingual services, so then you can outreach to people who don't have English as their first language or don't have all the technological resources to do online consultations or outreach services. Yeah, so that's one way of doing that as well. But even just sometimes I think with the COLD community, they don't realise that there are other services that are still running because a lot of the books were closed for other services. Yeah, better communication with them about what's available to them.
Okay, great.
Tamara, it's Jodie here again.
Yeah.
I know that you're seeking specific responses around COVID, but I think as our peak body, it would be really opportune to be talking about this not as necessarily as a COVID response, but in line with all the overall cultural response that we're all dealing with in relation to the government's inadequate response to sexual violence in Parliament House, and not be narrowing it to COVID. This is part and parcel of the overall cultural problem we have in this country, and that just because we had a pandemic, yes, it made things worse, but the problem was there all along, and all of the things that everyone has raised were pre-existing problems in our sector. And I think one of the mistakes we've made in the past, but there is a possibility that things are slowly, glacially changing, is that there are going to be more resources, and we need to be positioning our peak body to be there with all of those really critical things around gender drivers, and I think you know what I'm saying. But to not just say, oh, this is because it was a pandemic. So I'm not trying to minimise or reduce any of that, but everything that we've all been putting forward is part and parcel of what the needs were pre-pandemic. And it is because of the culture of sexual assault and attitude to women, discrimination, sexual violence, and so on and so on.
Sure. Thanks, Jodie. Yeah, they're great points, and we do continue to do advocacy in all the areas you're talking about. And certainly in the COVID responses, a lot of the responses we received related to wider issues rather than just COVID. Delia, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just want to say, yeah, that's exactly why we exist, Jodie, and we ourselves have been thoroughly disappointed and disgusted with the response in Canberra. And really trying to get into every area of government we can, including the New South Wales government, to have a bit of accountability, transparency and openness with us around the issues. And we've noted the silence from some, and we've called that out. And yeah, COVID obviously has exacerbated the issues, but absolutely they are entrenched in society and will definitely be forming part of our advocacy as we go forward. And we want to spend the April sector chat talking to everyone a bit about, again, the role of the peak and what we need to be doing as part of our strategic planning going into the next few months. So that's going to be absolutely key, and we really value that feedback. Thank you.
Just another thing up on the North Coast we've done during COVID, which was identified by our services and part of an interagency we're in, was we heard everywhere that everyone was receiving increases or influx of people coming in, and we certainly experienced the same. But we've got to say, at key points of actual lockdown, we had a decrease of services during that time, and women coming to face-to-face to the service or calling in. So we were actually quite concerned and targeted a little bit of a campaign up in our area around leaving violence is essential. There was all of this messaging out there to women that you should only leave your home if you need to exercise or if you need to go and do the food shopping, for example. But there was nothing in that was really pointing out that leaving violence is essential. So we really tried to campaign and spearhead that message up in our area, because our concern was actually the decrease. The police services in our area were reporting a decrease, the hospitals, ourselves, yeah, that was our biggest concern, that women were too worried to be going against government rule to be leaving for safety. So I think any lockdowns that do continue to occur, that we need to continue to put out strong messaging that it is essential. You need to leave if you're unsafe.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. The general messaging around the pandemic was all about staying home, and that is obviously not very helpful for this cohort of people.
On that point, COVID and the bushfires before that represented a huge increase in violence, and natural disasters, as climate change becomes more and more of a direct problem, will become more regular. So I do have some concerns about this constantly being seen as like kind of an emergency response and quite a reflexive response, when maybe it should be considered a long-term strategy, because we can pretty safely understand that this is going to happen. Natural disasters are going to continue to occur, and this is going to continue to be a pattern.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for that, Brie.
Thanks, Brie. And I was going to, sorry Tam, I interrupted, but I was going to say, just thinking about what you said there, when we talk about the shadow pandemic, I mean, it actually isn't a shadow pandemic. Just some of the language that is being used publicly is unhelpful, and it is all about the long-term strategy. And again, having just had this media interview, somebody said to me on behalf of DVNSW, you know, what are our thoughts around solutions? And you know, would you fund crisis over prevention? And it's like, we absolutely just have to put some serious investment into both and stop like prioritizing one or the other to actually make a difference. But yeah, a long-term approach. And I think the media and the government don't want to hear long-term because it doesn't work for cycles. But unfortunately, we know this is a long-term approach. Thanks, Bree.
One thing I was going to add to is that one thing that was done well during COVID was like task force and working groups working together to actually collaboratively bring all of the issues together. I know the government's saying in federal that they're kind of doing that at the moment, but I actually think that would be a really good way forward if we can have this collaborative group of people, not just a figurehead of, oh, here, we've done it, tick to box, but let's get in together with government, with different departments, ensure everyone is trauma-informed trained, because I think there's so much damage being done by DCJ and other government departments. And if we can bring everyone together to have that collaborative approach, which worked really well when you could actually say, hey, you think it's like this, but actually the reality of it is this. And that I think was a really good turning point during COVID, and was hoping it would continue, but it seemed to dwindle off because we used the excuse of, oh, there's no big crisis of pandemic at the moment. But I think that long term is a really good way forward.
Yeah, important point, Tali. So people have talked about the continuation of COVID funding, but it's also about the continuation of those collaborative models that emerged with COVID. And we don't want to go back to the pre-COVID functioning when that collaboration wasn't happening.
Yeah, I think the regular meetings were so helpful, and it created a bit of a level of accountability, and I'm definitely seeing them not as frequent. They're not as bad as they were, but they've definitely lessened the regularity, which is a bit of a concern. And I don't know if everyone knows, but it's probably important to know that DCJ is going through quite a big restructure at the moment. So there's a lot of redundancies and things happening, which is a little bit unsettling, but that's something just to be aware of. And again, not great news, but we can keep you posted when we know more. But I think they'll see some of their staff moving on, but not the key people, I guess, all of you are working with. They'll still be around, but that doesn't help Tali's feedback either, but we're on to that, and that's really helpful, Tali.
Did anyone else want to share any comments or concerns?
I think just off the back of what Tali was saying, what we saw was a degree of flexibility that we hadn't seen before. And as well as that idea of working together and things like that, we saw that there was a willingness to actually hear and respond to what we were saying as experts. And I think that won out for everyone. That improved the situation no end in our areas, especially where we lost visibility on children when schools were closed. And that's a really good barometer for us. And really in Parramatta, Western Sydney, we had less referrals. We were empty, and that was terrifying. So people were not getting to us. So I guess having those multiple safety strategies on how to, like losing visibility, we had a blackout really on these issues. But yeah, like I said, all of a sudden everybody was really flexible. The government was willing to understand and seek different viewpoints and different ways of doing things. Yeah, it was, it would be good that we didn't go back as business as usual for that.
And to add to that point, I think it also created a sense of feeling valued. And I think that also helps in the sense of burnout as well, because if you're not feeling valued and you're constantly swimming against the tide, then you do fatigue quicker and you do burn out quicker. And it was a horrible time, and burnout is part of it, but we're also an amazing, resilient group of people who do amazing things with so little. And I think feeling valued just bolsters that while you're working. And I think having those collaborative groups makes that happen more as well.
Thanks, Angela and Tali as well. Risk identification is something that came up in the survey responses as things people were concerned about during COVID because of known cases of DV or just not having clients coming physically through to the service. Anyone want to add anything about what they'd like DV New South Wales to be doing in this space? So I should say that the outcome of the survey and of this sector chat is that we're going to provide input based on what we've heard from you to DCJ about how to sustainably deal with COVID, and also about the sustainability of the sector generally, given that you know, under-resourcing is one of the things that we're continually advocating about, and the fact that that came through very strongly in the survey responses as well, that it's not just about COVID, but it's about under-resourcing generally, and COVID and the COVID funding injection just plays into that pre-existing scenario. But anything you like DV New South Wales to be adding to what we've already discussed, or that you'd like us to be doing in this space?
Sorry, another one from Warina. One thing that we've kind of talked a lot about in our team is, and it is related to COVID and those pressures that came up, and about children. I guess what we've noticed much more acutely is DCJ Child Protection seeing the engagement of SHS domestic violence services as a protective factor, which is true, but I think sometimes it's quick to misassess when we're referring back and children who we're worried about aren't meeting ROSH. And so in some ways it's kind of misassessed as it being a good thing, but if we're saying they're engaged with us but we're still really worried, we find that maybe it's a local issue, but I suspect it's not. It's hard to break through when we're kind of very worried about children, but they're getting screened out because they're engaged with us. So it's kind of this weird thing. We say we're working with them, we're worried. They say they're fine, they're working with you. So I think it would be good to maybe highlight that if there was a way for DCJ to really increase the weight that they give the information and concerns that we're giving them, and having some opportunity outside of just the ROSH to contribute to the intake and assessment process of how they make a determination for allocation. And I know that they're under-resourced and all those kinds of things, that sometimes they can't allocate because there's not a caseworker to do that. But I guess we have those concerns for children, and we just can't get the attention that they desperately need.
Yeah, thanks for letting us know about that, Taryn. That's a really important issue for us.
We'll share our child protection submission as well, Taryn. And I guess what I'm hearing as well on the ground is the other side of it too, where they're not, so then what you've just said is that they're not caring enough in some ways, or thinking your service is hanging on to it. And other cases where they're actually removing children from parents when that's actually totally unacceptable. So we're really trying to manage some really significant ends of the scale. So that's really important feedback. We'll share our child protection submission after this as well, because there's some key recommendations we're following up with government. And a massive shout out to Taryn's team, because there's so many of them, by the way. I just think it's awesome to see them all in the room. So thanks for coming. Amazing. Sorry, Tam.
No, Delia, I was going to throw over to you because I think we're almost out of time, and there are a few things you wanted to mention.
Oh, yes. So we will send after this. If people wanted to add any further information, Kathy Humphreys at the University of Melbourne is also doing a project, the Dahlia 19 project. And again, it's some of the information you've given to us today, but we'll send you the information sheet after this session so you can feed into it if you'd like. It's going to be national research, which I think will be really helpful in informing the national picture. So it's a call for assistance identifying policy and practice responses to domestic and family violence under COVID-19. Everything you've said today, again, we can feed in through Renata, who's on the advisory group, but it'd be great to hear from you too. Tam obviously will be doing a report to government based on the feedback we've had today. There's been so much stuff in the chat box. One thing we missed was ERO, Gillian. So what we'll do is we'll follow up with you after, but if you just check our weekly sector comms, there's been some movement on that. So every Thursday or Friday, you should get a weekly sector comms, and we've been feeding in on the movement. Senator Jenny McAllister, I should say, has been absolutely amazing and really pushing federal government. And Senator Ruston, I think, has kind of made some kind of commitments. So we're moving into a better space than we were a few weeks ago. So we're still trying to mobilise federal government to make sure they come to the table, but we'll make sure we send some information offline on that. And obviously Tam will be pulling together a report following today, but we just love these sessions with everyone, and we do appreciate everything you're saying, and we do bang the drum in terms of every bit of feedback you give us is taken really seriously, and we really need these spaces with you to continue to provide the evidence base to the government.